as it is. But managing down the nuclear danger is a significantly new task. And the language of how you measure war is language that comes from our tradition and is borrowed by others. Now, if that were our only problem, it would be big enough. There is a second, very different problem that emerged out of the 1990s. It was not the restraint on the use of force. It was trying to decide when force was a moral obligation to use. The title of the problem is called Humanitarian Military Intervention. The language that concretizes it is language that we've heard now for 20 years. Bosnia, Somalia, Rwanda, Kosovo. The problem here, very different than the nuclear question. Totally different. The nuclear question is how you avoid catastrophic damage. Humanitarian military intervention is what you do about creeping chaos. Chaos within a state where people are killing each other in the state. And the question about whether anybody else has any responsibility to do anything about it or not. The extreme case is genocide. And like nuclear weapons in the Cold War, genocide in modern consciousness had its origins, modern consciousness, in World War II. This audience, not my students, but this audience, is of an age that when I say to you, never again, you know exactly what I mean. We came away from World War II and said, never again genocide. But of course, the 1990s produced one. And people argue, if not genocide, then enormous damage is being done in a place like Darfur. So then the question becomes, what does the world do about genocide or less than genocide, ethnic cleansing, inside a state where that state is not threatening anybody else? We know what to do when states threaten others. But we struggled throughout the 1990s about what to do about humanitarian military intervention. We've come a long way. Again, the categories that were used were the just war categories. There is now a broad doctrine called the responsibility to protect, which argues that, at least one can argue, that the international community has moral and legal responsibility for not only genocide, but large-scale systematic violation of human rights and killing inside states. You see, this is a very different problem, morally and politically. There is no question we've got a political interest in controlling nuclear weapons. Iran, North Korea, etc. In many of the cases where humanitarian military intervention is at stake, there is no palpable U.S. interest. There certainly was no palpable U.S. interest in Rwanda. And so the dilemma here is that there are societies that can't command our attention. And so the question is how you think through the moral responsibility. Catholic teaching on the whole wants to argue for justifiable intervention in specific cases, but you have to figure out the case. Thirdly, the third use of force is terror. 9/11. 9/11 had three characteristics. It was transnational terror, it was transcendent terror, and it was traditional terror. Transnational terror, a private group that had the capacity to wreak damage halfway around the world against the most powerful nation in the world. We had not seen that before. Secondly, transcendent terror. The use of force was linked to a religious argument. And thirdly, traditional terror. Terrorists strike soft targets because they can't launch large, complicated military action. Now, the response to terrorism has then taken us deep into two wars and leaves us still in the middle of a struggle. It is important, I think, without trying to analyze the whole picture, that we keep in mind that in fighting terror, the primary moral imperative is not to become a terrorist, to keep restraint on force used, and to keep contained the methods and means of the struggle. Let me turn from foreign policy to domestic policy. I'm really trying to illustrate how Catholic ideas can be used. So, our largest domestic debate, of course, before us at the minute, is healthcare. This is our sixth try at a national debate about healthcare. Roosevelt had it on the agenda and took it off. Truman started one, and it did not reach any final conclusion. Nixon also sought to try to have a national overview on healthcare. Carter and Clinton also did. So Democratic and Republican administrations have tried at different times to sort of frame healthcare in the United States. As you know, it is 17% of the gross domestic product. And the fundamental problem is always the relationship of coverage, cost, and quality. How does Catholic teaching enter this discussion? I think we have sort of what I'll call three interests. One, healthcare as an issue of social justice. Secondly, healthcare as an issue of bioethics. And thirdly, the need for a pluralistic healthcare system. Healthcare as an issue of social justice follows the logic of the argument I've already laid out. Health is regarded in Catholic teaching as a good that is essential for human dignity. So therefore, to fail to provide even minimal levels of that good for citizens of a society is to fail to meet the standards of the common good. So I think our general argument is that the sacredness of the person spawns the right to health care, and then the responsibility of the society is to determine at least how to establish a minimal moral ground on health care. That's a first question. That is the dominant question that's in the debate. There is a second question, however, and that's health care as bioethics. Because Catholic teaching thinks that when you lay hands on the human person, that also is a moral act. And therefore, there is a quite extensive framework of limits and restraints about what can be done in the name of laying hands on the person. The dominant issues tend to be issues at the beginning of life and the end of life, when life is most vulnerable. But in fact, we have a range of guidelines that cut across questions like experimentation and surgery. And therefore, we are concerned not only about health care as a good for everyone, we're also concerned about how law and policy shapes the laying hands on the human person. Thirdly, I talk about health care and a pluralistic system. All I really mean by this is, as you look at health care, there is increasing consolidation, both economically, but also to some degree there will be politically. And one of the things we have an interest in is keeping space to try to serve our wider civil community with the best resources Catholicism has, in both seeking to cover those uncovered, but also to demonstrate what we mean by restraints and obligations